How I wish your father can see how adorable his toddlers are.
There is a moment in every person's life, a single, quiet, seemingly ordinary moment, that changes everything forever. You don't always recognize it when it's happening. Sometimes it arrives wrapped in a sheet of paper slid across a kitchen table. Sometimes it comes as a text message at 2 in the morning. Sometimes it finds you alone in a clinic, staring at a black and white screen, watching 4 tiny heartbeats pulse in the dark, while the man who put them there is already somewhere else. Already moving on, already writing the next chapter of his life without you in it. And in that moment, you face a choice that nobody prepares you for. You either let that moment bury you, or you let it build you. This is the story of a woman who chose to be built. And on the day the man who broke her expected to see ruins, she pulled up in a Bentley. Before we go any further, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now. Let us know where in the world you are watching from. We genuinely love connecting with this community. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, let's get into this story. It was a Saturday in September, the kind of morning that feels almost too perfect for the things about to unfold inside it. The sky over Atlanta was clear and wide, and the kind of golden that makes everything look like it belongs in a movie. And somewhere across that city, in a ballroom that had been reserved for 14 months, decorated with 12,000 white roses and draped in ivory silk that cost more per yard than most people's car payments, a man named Marcus Webb was standing in front of a mirror, buttoning his cufflinks and telling himself that today was going to be the greatest day of his life. He had rehearsed that thought many times over the past few weeks. He believed it completely. And he had a reason beyond the obvious. Beyond the new bride, beyond the champagne, beyond the string quartet warming up in the lobby downstairs. Marcus Webb had a plan. A small, private, deeply calculated plan he had been holding on to like a secret he couldn't wait to tell. And the entire plan rested on one name he had placed on the guest list. A name that had absolutely no business being there. Naomi Rivers, his ex-wife. Now, yes, you might be asking yourself why any man would invite the woman he divorced to his own wedding. That is the right question. And the answer tells you everything you need to know about Marcus Webb. He didn't invite her out of goodwill. He didn't invite her to make peace or extend an olive branch or demonstrate that 2 people can end a marriage and still remain decent toward each other. He invited her because he wanted her to see. He wanted Naomi Rivers to walk into that ballroom and look around at everything he had built, the flowers, the money, the woman on his arm, and feel the full weight of what she had lost. He had imagined her face. He had imagined her standing there in whatever she could afford, looking diminished and small and reminded. He had even mentioned it to one of his groomsmen the night before at the rehearsal dinner, or half laughing, like it was just a casual thought. It wasn't a casual thought. It was the whole point. The wedding was for Tiffany. But the invitation to Naomi, that was for Marcus. What Marcus did not know. What he could not have known, because he had never once picked up the phone to ask, was that Naomi Rivers was no longer the woman he had left. She was not broken. She was not struggling. She was not sitting somewhere in a small apartment trying to figure out how to put her life back together. In the 4 years since Marcus handed her divorce papers and a check for $10,000 and called it a fresh start, Naomi had done something that defied every assumption he had made about her the moment he decided she was no longer worth keeping. She had built an empire, a real one. And on this particular Saturday morning in September, while Marcus stood in front of that mirror practicing his vows, Naomi Rivers was in her own home, calm and unhurried, helping 4 toddlers into matching outfits that cost more than Marcus's first business investment. She was not nervous. She was not rehearsing anything. She simply got her children ready, walked out to a black Bentley waiting in her driveway, and drove toward a wedding that was about to become something nobody in that ballroom had prepared for. Now, before we tell you how we got here, we need you to understand the full scope of what you are about to hear. Because this is not simply a story about a wedding that went sideways. This is a story about what happens when a man confuses a woman's grace for weakness. This is a story about what divorce actually costs and who ends up paying. This is a story about 4 children who grew up not knowing their father's name, and a woman who decided that was fine because she would be enough. And this is ultimately a story about the particular kind of justice that has no courtroom, no judge, no sentence, just a black Bentley pulling up to a curb and a crowd of wedding guests going completely, utterly silent. Here are the questions this story is going to answer. Who was Naomi Rivers before Marcus Webb entered her life? And who did she become after he left it? Why did a man who had seemingly moved on, who had a new relationship and a new life, and apparently no reason to look backward, go out of his way to make sure his ex-wife had a front-row seat to his happiness? Anissa, what was Naomi carrying the day Marcus served her those papers? A secret so significant that it would have changed every single calculation Marcus ever made, had he known. And what happened inside that ballroom when the guest he had invited to be humiliated arrived looking like the most powerful person in the room? We are going to answer all of it. Stay with us. Because this story, every detail of it, is worth your full attention. To understand Naomi Rivers, you have to go back to a small city in Mississippi called Meridian, where she grew up the second of 4 children in a house that had more love in it than money, but never made you feel the difference. Her mother, Carol Rivers, worked as a school administrator. Her father, James Rivers, drove long-haul trucks 6 days a week and came home on Sundays smelling like the road, and always bringing something small and unexpected. A pack of cards, a book from a truck stop, once a snow globe from a state he'd passed through that Naomi kept on her windowsill until she was 17. They were not wealthy, but they were intentional. And Naomi absorbed that intentionality the way a plant absorbs light, constantly, quietly, and in a way that only becomes visible when you step back and see how tall she grew. By the time Naomi graduated high school, she had a 4.1 GPA, a full academic scholarship to Clark Atlanta University, and a reputation among her teachers as the kind of student who didn't just do the work. She understood it. She understood why the work mattered. She understood systems, patterns, that's the way organizations move and breathe and make decisions. Her economics professor during her sophomore year told her point blank that she had a gift he rarely encountered. The ability to look at a broken process and immediately see not just what was wrong, but what it would take to fix it. That gift would eventually be worth millions. But first, it would cost her everything. She met Marcus Webb during the spring semester of her junior year. He was a graduate business student. He was tall and well-spoken and had the particular kind of confidence that is almost indistinguishable from competence, until you look closely enough to find the seam. He walked into the coffee shop where Naomi was studying one afternoon, sat across from her without asking, looked at the textbook she was reading, and said something smart enough about it that she looked up from the page. That was all it took. She looked up, and Marcus Webb was looking back. And for the next 6 years, she never quite stopped looking. People who knew them then describe a couple that seemed genuinely matched. He made her laugh. She made him think. He was ambitious in the way that feels exciting when you're young, always moving, always pitching, always painting a picture of what things were going to look like when everything finally came together. And Naomi, who had grown up watching her father work himself to the bone for the people he loved, found something familiar in that drive. She believed in it. She believed in him. That belief is what made everything that came later so devastating. They married when Naomi was 24 and Marcus was 27. And it was not a large wedding. They didn't have the money for that yet. But it was warm and full of people who loved them. And Naomi wore a dress her mother had helped her find at a consignment shop that they altered themselves over 3 weekends. And she was, by every account of everyone who was there, radiant. Not because of the dress, because of the way she looked at Marcus. Like she had made a decision she was completely at peace with. Like she already knew, somehow, that this was going to be a great love. She was right that it was going to be significant. She was wrong about what kind. In the early years of their marriage, they built a life together in Atlanta that looked, from the outside, like exactly what they had planned. As Marcus was working at a mid-sized consulting firm while developing what he described as a revolutionary idea for a tech-adjacent business services company. Naomi was working too. 2 jobs for a period, a corporate data analyst position during the day, and freelance advisory work in the evenings, quietly building a reputation in circles Marcus didn't even know she was running in. And here is the part of this story that becomes important later. Naomi was good. She was exceptionally good at her work. The clients who hired her for freelance projects kept coming back. They referred her to other clients. She was turning down work by the time she was 26 because she didn't have enough hours in the day. But Marcus's business needed capital, and Naomi believed in it. And so she folded her freelance earnings back into their household, or into his dreams, into a future she assumed that they were building together. She paused opportunities for herself. She turned down a partnership offer from a boutique advisory firm because the timing wasn't right for the family they were planning. She worked harder when Marcus's business went through its first rough patch, covering expenses without making him feel the weight of it. She did what millions of women throughout history have done for the men they love. She made herself smaller so he could feel larger. And she did it willingly. That is the part that matters. Nobody forced Naomi Rivers to set aside her own ambitions. She chose to, because she believed the investment would return to both of them. She was not wrong about the investment. She was wrong about who it would return to. The trouble with loving someone who is driven by image is that image, by its nature, is always shifting. What looks like ambition in a man of 27 starts to look like something else in a man of 32, especially when the business he has been building for 5 years starts showing real returns. And the people he is suddenly spending time with are a different class of person than the ones who were there in the beginning. Marcus's company, a business process outsourcing firm he had named Webb Solutions, landed its first major contract when he was 31. It was not a Fortune 500 deal, but it was significant, and it changed the way Marcus moved through the world almost overnight. He started flying business class. He started buying suits that cost what they used to spend on groceries for a month. He started coming home later, and when he came home, he had less to say. Not angry, not cold exactly, just elsewhere. Like a man who has already moved his attention to the next room and is only physically present in this one out of habit. Naomi noticed. She would have been a poor analyst if she hadn't. She noticed the shift in his language when he talked about the future. It used to be we. Gradually, it became I. She noticed the way he would sometimes look at her across a dinner table with an expression she couldn't fully name. Not unkind, but evaluative. like a man quietly deciding whether something still fit the life he was picturing. She noticed the nights he stayed in hotels near the office, when the drive home was only 40 minutes. She filed these things away the way she filed everything. Carefully, quietly, without showing her hand. Because she also remembered that she had made a promise. And because a part of her believed that if she just held on, if she just continued being steady and present and good, whatever distance was growing between them would eventually close. That belief was one of the most expensive mistakes of her life. By their 6th year of marriage, the distance had not closed. It had formalized. Marcus had grown a social circle that Naomi was rarely invited into. Business dinners she wasn't told about. Networking events she learned of afterward through someone else's social media post. She would later describe this period in a conversation with her closest friend as feeling like being slowly erased. Not dramatically, not with cruelty she could point to and name. Just a gradual, quiet removal. A woman being edited out of a story she had helped write from the very first page. What she did not know, what she would not know for some time, was that there was a specific reason for the erasure, a name attached to it. A woman Marcus had met at one of those dinners Naomi hadn't been invited to. A corporate attorney named Vanessa, who was everything Marcus had decided Naomi was not. Newer, shinier, unburdened by the years of his becoming, unaware of who he had been before he decided who he wanted to be. Vanessa is not the point of this story, and she barely qualifies as a footnote in Naomi's. What matters is that the existence of that relationship gave Marcus the permission he had apparently been waiting for. Permission to make official what had already happened in private. And so one evening in early spring, a Tuesday, unremarkable in every way except for what happened inside it. Marcus Webb came home at a reasonable hour, sat down at the kitchen table across from his wife, and slid a manila envelope toward her. Inside it were divorce papers, already prepared, already reviewed by an attorney, just waiting for her signature. Naomi looked at the envelope. She looked at Marcus. She did not cry. Not then. She asked him one question. Just one. She asked him if there was someone else. And Marcus did not lie to her. He said yes. And then, because he seemed to feel that the transaction needed to be completed cleanly, he pushed a second piece of paper across the table, a check for $10,000, and told her he hoped it would help her get a fresh start. $10,000. For 6 years, for 2 jobs, for every deferred dream, every folded ambition, his every Tuesday evening she'd spent believing in a future that had apparently already been canceled without her knowledge. Naomi picked up the pen. She signed the papers. She left the check on the table and walked to the bedroom and closed the door. And Marcus Webb, apparently satisfied that the business of ending his marriage had been handled efficiently, let himself out. 3 weeks after Marcus left, Naomi went to a doctor's appointment she had scheduled before the divorce, a routine check-in she had nearly canceled because everything inside her felt too raw and too unsteady for anything as normal as a doctor's appointment. She went anyway. Because Naomi Rivers has always, in the deepest moments, chosen to keep moving. What happened at that appointment was not routine. The doctor ran tests. The doctor looked at results, and the doctor sat across from Naomi in a small, clean examination room and told her something that rearranged the entire landscape of her life in the space of about 90 seconds. Naomi was pregnant. Not just pregnant. She was carrying quadruplets, 4 embryos, naturally conceived, all of them with detectable heartbeats, all of them apparently having decided that whatever storm their mother was walking into, they were coming along for it. She did not call Marcus. Let that sit with you for a moment. She did not pick up the phone. She did not send a message. She simply decided, privately, completely, with the full weight of the choice resting only on her own shoulders, that Marcus Webb had made his decision when he slid those papers across the table. And she was not going to walk back through a door he had closed and ask him to reconsider on the basis of 4 heartbeats he didn't know existed. She moved to her Aunt Clara's house in a suburb north of Atlanta with 2 suitcases, a laptop, and enough freelance contacts to start generating income almost immediately. Clara, a retired school principal in her late 60s, who had the particular combination of warmth and backbone that characterizes the best of Southern women, did not ask Naomi a lot of questions in those early weeks. She made room, she cooked. She let Naomi cry when she needed to cry, and she let her work when she needed to work. And she did not once suggest that what Naomi was attempting was impossible. What Naomi had, what she had always had, and what Marcus had perhaps never fully recognized because it existed mostly in the spaces between the things he was paying attention to, was an almost preternatural ability to see inside organizations and identify exactly where they were losing efficiency, losing momentum, losing the invisible systems that determine whether something scales or stalls. She had been doing this quietly for years, first as a corporate analyst, then in her freelance work, then in the contributions she had made to Marcus's business that he had received as obvious and therefore unremarkable. Now, for the first time, she was doing it entirely for herself. And the people who hired her started talking about her to other people. 1 client became 3. 3 became 12. By the time Naomi gave birth to her 4 children, Aria, Eden, Cole, and Zara, in a delivery room where the only family present was Aunt Clara holding her hand, NR Consulting Group had a waiting list. Being a new mother of quadruplets and a solo founder of a growing consulting business simultaneously is not something that lends itself to simple description. Naomi has said that those first 18 months after the children were born exist in her memory as a blur. Not the painful kind, but the kind that comes from moving so fast and so constantly that individual days lose their edges. She learned to work in fragments, a conference call during a feeding, a proposal drafted between 3 and 5 in the morning, the only reliably quiet hours in the house. There were nights that broke her open. There were mornings where she sat in the kitchen before anyone else was awake and could not immediately remember why she had decided this was survivable. And then one of the children would make a sound in the next room, and Naomi would get up and go to them and remember, with absolute clarity, exactly why. By the time Aria, Eden, Cole, and Zara turned 2, NR Consulting Group had secured contracts with companies that Marcus Webb's entire firm would have struggled to get in the door with. By the time the children turned 3, Naomi had a team of 7 full-time employees and had been profiled in 2 business publications, neither of which she sought out, both of which came to her because her clients were talking. She had moved out of Clara's house and into a home of her own, a 5-bedroom property in a neighborhood that Marcus, had he driven through it, would have found aspirational. She drove a Bentley, black and understated, not because she needed anyone to see it, but because she had spent 6 years driving a sensible used sedan while redirecting every extra dollar into someone else's future, and she had decided that this particular luxury was hers, and she was going to enjoy it without apology. She enrolled the quadruplets in a private school where the waiting list was 2 years long. This is the life Marcus Webb did not know existed when he addressed that gold foil wedding invitation and wrote Naomi's name in careful, deliberate cursive. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon at Naomi's office. Her assistant brought it in with the rest of the day's correspondence, and Naomi almost missed it in the stack. Then she saw the handwriting on the envelope. She recognized it immediately. Some things you don't unlearn. Inside was a gold foil invitation to the wedding of Marcus Anthony Webb and Tiffany Renee Coleman, to be held at the Grand Roselawn Estate in Atlanta on a Saturday in September. Ceremony beginning at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And tucked inside the invitation, in that same careful handwriting on a piece of personal stationery, a note. It read, "Naomi, I hope you'll be able to make it. It would mean a great deal to see how far we've both come." Naomi read the note twice. Then she set it down on her desk and looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline for a long moment. Her assistant, who had lingered in the doorway sensing something significant, asked if everything was okay. Naomi turned back from the window, and she was smiling. Not the smile of a woman who has been wounded. The smile of a woman who has just been handed exactly the opportunity she didn't know she was waiting for. She RSVP'd yes that afternoon. +4. On the morning of his wedding, Marcus Webb woke up in the penthouse suite of a hotel 3 blocks from the Grand Roselawn Estate, feeling, by his own account to his groomsmen, completely at peace. He had slept well. He had eaten a clean breakfast. And there, somewhere in the middle of the afternoon, after the ceremony, at the reception where the seating chart had placed Naomi at a table with clear sight lines to the head table. The quiet, satisfying moment when she would have no choice but to look at everything he had built and measure it against whatever she had managed to scrape together. He had thought about this moment with more frequency than was probably healthy. His best man, Derek, noticed something during the morning preparations that he would later describe as making him uneasy. Marcus kept checking his phone. Not for messages from Tiffany, who was getting ready across town. He was checking the RSVP confirmation, Naomi's name. The +4 notation, which Marcus had assumed was a formatting mistake. He had not thought about what the 4 meant. While Marcus was across the city checking his phone, Naomi Rivers was doing what she had been doing every morning for the past 4 years. She was being a mother. Aria was refusing her shoes. Cole had decided, with the particular certainty of a 3-year-old, that his chosen outfit was unacceptable and had produced an alternative from somewhere in the back of his closet. Eden was sitting perfectly still on the edge of the bed, watching her siblings with the serene, slightly amused expression she had worn since approximately the age of 8 months, as though she had arrived on Earth already understanding that the world was chaotic and that the correct response was to find it entertaining. And Zara was singing. Nobody knew where she had learned the song. Nobody knew all the words. But she sang it with complete commitment, and the sound of it filled the hallway of Naomi's home on that September morning and made everything, despite the occasion, feel like something close to joy. Naomi moved through the morning with the same efficiency she brought to board presentations, purposeful, calm, nothing wasted. She got 4 toddlers into matching outfits. She kissed Clara on the cheek because Clara had insisted on being at the house that morning, had shown up with coffee and a look that said everything without saying anything at all. And then, at 12:45 in the afternoon, Naomi Rivers walked out the front door of her home, helped 4 small children into the back of a black Bentley, and told the driver the address of the Grand Roselawn Estate. The Grand Roselawn Estate on a September afternoon looks like something designed specifically to make people feel the weight of occasions. The driveway lined with magnolia trees over 100 years old, the entrance flanked by white columns and cascading flower arrangements. The walkway lined with white rose petals and lit with small warm lanterns. A string quartet near the door playing something elegant and unobtrusive. It was, by every measurable standard, a beautiful event. The black Bentley arrived at 12 minutes past 1 o'clock. The valet attendant who approached it later described the moment with a detail that circulated among the staff for weeks afterward. He said the car pulled up and he reached for the door, and then it opened from the inside. And the woman who stepped out was the kind of person who makes you involuntarily straighten your posture. Not because of the dress, though the dress was extraordinary, but because of the way she occupied space, like she had always belonged in it. Like every room she had ever walked into had been waiting for her. And then, before he had fully processed the first impression, 4 small children emerged from the back seat, dressed in identical cream-colored outfits, looking around at the venue with wide and curious eyes, unbothered and beautiful and unmistakably, irreversibly, bearing the features of a man who was standing 40 feet away at the front of a ballroom. The crowd near the entrance went quiet in stages. The way silence travels through a space, person to person, as each individual processes the same information and stops talking to make room for it. A woman near the top of the steps saw Naomi first and went still. Then the man beside her. Then a bridesmaid who had come outside to check on late arrivals looked up, and the clipboard she was holding tilted, and she caught it only just in time. People did not gasp or exclaim. They simply stopped. Because here was Naomi Rivers, and she was not what any assumption about her had prepared them for. She was not diminished. She was not compensating. She was not performing anything. She was simply, thoroughly, unambiguously herself. She walked through the entrance. She followed the seating arrangement to the seat Marcus had specifically placed for her. Front row, clear view of the altar. And she settled the children beside her with the practiced, quiet efficiency of a woman who has been managing 4 small people in public spaces for going on 3 years. She smoothed her gown. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked forward. And somewhere in the room, standing at the altar where he had been positioned since 12:45, Marcus Webb was looking back. He saw the Bentley from the window. His best man, Derek, saw it first and said nothing. But Marcus caught his expression and turned. He saw the car. He saw Naomi step out. And then he saw the children, on all 4 of them. And something happened to his face that Derek would later struggle to describe accurately. Because those 4 children, Cole, Aria, Eden, and Zara, had Marcus Webb's jawline, his nose, his eyes, unmistakably, undeniably. The resemblance was not subtle. It was not the kind of thing you could attribute to coincidence and move on. It was the kind of resemblance that answers a question with a certainty that leaves no room for follow-up. Marcus Webb did not move from the altar. He stood exactly where he was. He breathed. He was doing what he had perhaps never fully done in 6 years of marriage. He was seeing Naomi Rivers completely clearly. And what he saw was not what he had planned for. The wedding ceremony of Marcus Webb and Tiffany Coleman began at 2 o'clock and did not finish. The officiant took his position. The music cued. Tiffany appeared at the back of the aisle in a dress her closest friends had spent 4 months helping her choose, and she walked forward on her father's arm toward the man waiting at the front of the room. Marcus was standing. He was facing forward. But every person who was watching him described the same thing. He was somewhere else. His eyes kept moving. Tiffany's father delivered her to him. Marcus took her hands. The officiant began speaking. And then Tiffany, who had spent enough time studying the man across from her to know when something was wrong, looked at him. Really looked. And then she looked at the front row. She saw the children. She looked back at Marcus. And in the small, private language that exists between 2 people who know each other well enough to communicate without words, she asked him a question, and in Marcus's expression answered it. Tiffany Coleman released his hands, gently, deliberately, without drama and without a scene. She turned to her maid of honor and said something very quietly. And then she walked back down the aisle she had just come up. Not running, not crying, just walking. The way a person walks when they have made a decision and intend to honor it. The room was completely silent. 400 people, the flowers, the music, the lanterns, the 12,000 white roses. All of it held completely still. And then, from the front row, Zara turned to Naomi and whispered something. And Naomi whispered something back. And they both settled into their seats as though they were simply waiting for whatever came next, because Naomi Rivers was not the one who had created this moment. She had simply shown up to one that Marcus had created for himself. Marcus found Naomi in the garden off the eastern side of the estate, approximately 40 minutes after the ceremony dissolved. She was watching Cole try to catch a bumblebee near one of the rose hedges, crouched slightly beside him with one hand hovering near his shoulder. She did not turn around when she heard the footsteps on the stone path. She knew who it was. Marcus stopped a few feet from her. He looked at Cole. He looked at Aria and Eden and Zara. He looked at them for a long time. Then he said the only thing available to him. He said, "You knew. You knew this whole time." Naomi straightened slowly. She still hadn't turned to face him. She said, "You never asked, Marcus." He took a breath. "Why didn't you tell me?" She turned then, and her expression was not angry. And it was not triumphant. It was simply settled. The expression of a woman who has had 4 years to decide what she thinks about something, and has arrived at a conclusion she is completely at peace with. She said, "You handed me a check for $10,000 and told me it was a fresh start. I decided to take you at your word." Marcus looked at his 4 children again. Eden had wandered to the fountain. Cole had given up on the bumblebee and was investigating a gap in the stone wall with absolute scientific seriousness. Aria was watching Marcus with the polite, unimpressed curiosity of a 3-year-old encountering a stranger who is generating unusual tension in the adults nearby. And Zara was singing the same song from that morning. Marcus stood in that garden and looked at everything he had not known existed. And then Naomi collected her children the way she collected everything, efficiently, lovingly, without fanfare. And she walked back through the garden toward the front of the estate where the Bentley was waiting. And she drove home. 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, NR Consulting Group announced a significant new round of investment at a private event on a Midtown Atlanta rooftop. The lead investor who had moved first and fastest, with the kind of conviction that signals to every other investor in the room that serious attention is being paid, was not someone from the traditional venture world. She was a corporate attorney who had 6 months earlier been walking down an aisle in a white dress. Her name was Tiffany Coleman. She had found Naomi not through any mutual introduction, but because in the days after the wedding, he's sitting alone in her apartment processing everything that had happened. She had done what intelligent people do when trying to understand a situation. She had researched it. She looked up NR Consulting Group. She read the client testimonials, the trade press profiles, the revenue figures. And she arrived at a conclusion she later described as obvious. The woman Marcus Webb had invited to humiliate was considerably more worth knowing than the man who had invited her. She sent Naomi an email. Professional, brief, no reference to Marcus, no acknowledgement of the wedding. Just, "I've heard of your company. I'm impressed by what I've seen. I'd like to have a conversation." Naomi read it. She sat with it for a day. Then she replied. They spoke for 2 hours. They met the following week. And what was supposed to be a transactional professional exchange became, over the months that followed, something that looked considerably more like a genuine partnership and, quietly, a friendship. At the rooftop event, when someone asked Tiffany what had drawn her to NR Consulting Group, she said, "I heard that someone had tried to use this company's founder as a prop in their own story. And I thought anyone who can walk into that situation and come out looking the way Naomi looked is someone I want backing my portfolio." Marcus was not at the event. He had, by that point, reached out to Naomi through a mutual contact, asking if she would be open to a conversation about the children. She had replied that she would. She had always planned to reply that way, not because she owed him anything, but because Aria and Eden and Cole and Zara deserved a father who showed up. And if Marcus Webb was finally ready to show up, she was not going to be the one who stood in the way of that. She simply intended to make sure he understood, going in, exactly what kind of woman he was dealing with. He understood. He had understood since the Bentley. Here is what this story is actually about. Not the wedding, not the Bentley, not the dramatic silence when 4 children stepped out of a car and a crowd held its breath. Those are the externals. The story underneath, the one that stays with you, is about what happens to a person when the scaffolding of a life they built around someone else is suddenly removed. And they discover in the unexpected open air of that removal what they are actually made of. Marcus Webb looked at a woman he had shared his life with and arrived, gradually, at an assessment of her that had far more to do with his own limitations than with hers. He decided she was a certain kind of person. He decided she occupied a certain ceiling. And then, rather than remain curious about someone he had pledged to know fully, he packaged 6 years of her life into a $10,000 check and called it resolved. What Naomi discovered, in the long months after the divorce, is something that a remarkable number of people have discovered in the aftermath of being underestimated. That what looks like devastation from the outside is frequently, from the inside, a kind of liberation. Not immediately, not without cost. Not without the nights that break you open and the mornings you have to rebuild yourself from scratch before anyone else is awake. But eventually, the weight of someone else's low expectations lifts from your shoulders and you discover that you can move differently without it. You can reach further. You can build things you would not have had the courage to attempt while you were still trying to be what someone else had decided you were. Naomi Rivers walked into the Grand Roselawn estate on a September afternoon, not as a woman seeking satisfaction, but as a woman who had settled something deeply within herself and wanted one final time to stand in the same space as the person who had underestimated her and let the truth simply be visible. No announcement, no confrontation, no speech, just presence, just the quiet, irrefutable fact of herself and the life she had built and the 4 small people who had her eyes and his face and absolutely no idea on that particular afternoon that they were standing at the center of one of the most quietly momentous scenes that building had ever witnessed. Before we go, we want to leave you with a question, and we genuinely want you to answer it in the comments below, because this community has some of the most thoughtful perspectives we have ever encountered. At what moment in this story do you think Marcus Webb felt the full weight of what he had given up? Was it when the Bentley pulled up? Was it when he saw the children's faces? Was it when Tiffany walked back down that aisle? Or was it later, in the silence of an empty hotel suite on what was supposed to be the greatest day of his life, sitting with the particular quiet of a man who has finally run out of things to plan? Tell us. And before we dive deeper into our next story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Next week, we are bringing you a story that begins with a man who faked his own death to escape a life he no longer wanted, and ends 10 years later when his daughter became his boss without knowing who he was. That story's worth the wait. We will see you then.